And then just let me know if at any point we should take a pause. All right, so Emily's going to start us off by sharing on the screen our narrative budget, and we're going to go through it just section by section, giving a short overview, and then a real opportunity for folks to ask if you want to. So,
yeah, so I did want to mention, if you're not familiar with what a narrative budget is, the way that it works is that it's we take our whole budget, and then we take, like, per section, we take a look at, like, how many hours do the pastors work on worship, and sort of take up, if we would say, like, oh, 40% of my hours per week is dedicated to worship, then we would sort of allocate 40% of our salary or package to the cost of, like, what falls under worship or community or outreach. So if you're wondering, sort of like, what do these numbers mean, and, like, what's behind those numbers, that's an example of, like, how we sort of calculate, or how our finance team calculates those numbers. So just a heads up. Our focus this year is around, us being multiple pieces of the puzzle. And so if you haven't received a piece of puzzle in the mail, that is a piece of a bigger image associated with your site, then talk to your site pastor about that, and they can make sure that you have that. But really, we just were thinking, like, both in terms of, like, the pandemic being a time when a lot of people got into puzzles, but also in the ways that we often feel I think many folks have felt, like, disconnected and fragmented. It can be hard to grasp the whole picture of, like, what's going on, certainly at UVC, what we're a part of, when we can only see our own piece. And so, like, kind of bringing those pieces together is essential for understanding, kind of, and celebrating, like, what God is doing at Urban Village. So some of the things that we certainly worship has historically and traditionally been sort of the heart of our life together, our primary gathering, way of gathering. And that, I think, is moving toward a shift in some ways, just in terms of the general climate of church as a whole. But worship has been a place where we have put a lot of our resources, both in terms of time as well as creative energy. And so we've tried lots of different things. Jennifer, who is with us now, she'll talk a little bit more, but she was a church planting resident with us a couple of years ago, explored the possibility of launching a UVC in Cincinnati, and has since returned, and is serving as our guinea pig digipastor, to help us sort of explore what does online worship look like, because we've come to recognize how important that is. We did all kinds of other things just to sort of experiment with what worship could look like over the course of the year, and you can see some of that listed in this. And I should say, I forgot to mention that you can find a copy of this document on our website at urbanvillagechurch.org/give. And so you can download a copy of our narrative budget. But we tried lots of different things for worship this year, online, outdoors, thinking about how do we do worship in non-traditional ways and non-traditional spaces, to help kind of the substance of what it means for us to be together in worship, to still be experienced, even if it's at a social distance or remotely. So now, as many of you know, and have experienced, we are back in person with worship at all 5 of our sites. By the way, we launched our 5th location formally in River Forest, UVC West. And we've really tried to be thoughtful about all the ways that we come together in COVID conscious ways, and continue to sort of explore what that can look like, particularly to make sure that feels safe for all ages, and all kind of lifestyles, or like health realities. So all of that comes to about $350,000, $352, as you can see in those numbers. So that's kind of the overview of worship. Are there any thoughts or well, I guess we'll have time for more questions later on, but I guess I would ask, it has been an experiment to start worship again in person, and we really just were like, we don't really know what what's going to come of it and what that's going to look like and all of that. And it's been a good start, but also not without its challenges. And so I'm curious, for you, Mike, or Adrian, if there's anything you want to highlight or celebrate about what you've experienced with worship this since you've been at UVC, whether it's this whole past year or just the last couple of weeks.
Well, I guess we were always concerned about the numbers and trying to increase the numbers. And I was just wondering what more approaches, tactics have we used to try to bring the in-person worship up?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got several different things that we are facing, right? One is that a lot of people are out of habit. Their weekly rhythms have really just shifted and changed over the last couple of years. And so that people are kind of getting back in the habit, along with people are kind of like relearning how to be in large groups together and kind of rebuilding some comfort around that as well. And so we have different folks who are in different places of comfort. But to your point about like, so what are we doing to try to reach out? I think, actually our online presence has really made a big difference in terms of being kind of like what we're sort of discovering, like people's first foray into UVC. So, it's like their way to kind of be a lurker without having to show up in any way that might kind of make them seen and when they're not quite ready. So we've had some folks come and say, oh, I've been with you, online for the last couple of months or whatever, and I decided to finally come in. I think we've tried a lot of our traditional outreach activities, whether, as farmers market, outreach at Edgewater, and Wicker Park Fest when that came out, the Pride Southside event a couple of months ago. So a lot of it is just kind of rebuilding too. We've talked a little bit. I know I need to sort of move on to the next. We need to move to the next section, but I will say kind of lastly that we've talked also about how many of our sites have sort of like an annual cycle where a percentage of people, like for example, at Wicker Park, nearly half of the congregation will turn over in the course of a year just because people move or relocate, their jobs, change or whatever. And so we sort of lose half the people and then we gain the same number of people, in the course of a year. Well, over the last 18 months or so, we've really only had 2 cycles of loss. And so we're doing the work of rebuilding as well. And Wicker Park is seeing, for just to continue using that as an example, is seeing like new people coming through the door every day. Pastor D'Angelo is saying, new people are coming, and now the new people are bringing new people, and they're coming, weekly or on a weekly basis. And so, there are some one-offs, but there are other folks who are kind of starting to make it their home. So it's just we're in a strange space when it comes to the experience of worship.
Also, I think this is probably a question a lot of people have, Mike, so I'm glad that we can talk about it early. Worship is smaller than it was pre-pandemic, but I also think a big part is like, there are a lot of people who understandably aren't going to feel safe coming back to in-person worship for 6 to 12 months. And that's just the reality. Either they've got little kids or they're immunocompromised or, right? And that's part of why we have our enduring commitment to online worship to continue to keep people engaged. But also it's just not unique to UVC. Compared to peer churches, UVC is actually doing pretty well. There was a study that came out from a group of churches, because I've been trying to look around, right, to be like, okay, what does this mean? Most churches are at 30%, some less, of pre-pandemic attendance. And so part of it is maybe the pandemic isn't over. And so maybe we just won't know anything until the pandemic is over and things will return. Or maybe we're living through a great transition in what worshiping life looks like. Because a lot of people tell us that they're still related to the UVC community, but weekly Sunday worship in-person attendance might just be a smaller part of their worshiping life than it used to. And so I think we're this is a real time of like, being open to the Holy Spirit about what the format of community looks like in the next year. But what I feel good about is that the people who are coming, I think, are experiencing transformative centering and connecting worship, and new people continue to have in-person worship to come to now, in addition to online worship, because different people have different needs. Some people just could not do online. It slowly killed their spirit, right? Some people online is the best thing that ever happened. So I think we're sort of doing what we can do, and the world is going through one of the biggest transformations it's going to go through in our lifetime. So it's going to take time to see.
Okay, sounds good. One more real quick question, or actually comment, is that I just happened to be up at the Edgewater Chamber of Commerce today, and like the marketing director, he strongly suggested that we put a little blurb in their newsletter to let them know that we are back open at UVC Edgewater, and to also put enough in there to also let them know that we are online as well, and trying to get that sample of folks who are in the UVC Edgewater region.
Well, we'll definitely make sure to pass that on to both Pastor Chan and Blake, our communications director, so that way we can follow up on that. Thank
Okay,
you.
sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. So outreach.
Speaking of,
yeah. One of the really interesting things that I have sort of learned over being a part of a church for many years is that you do spend the biggest chunk of your money, the biggest chunk of your energy and time and resources on worship, not because it's the only thing that you do, but because it makes possible everything else. It's the front door, right? It's where people get connected to community. And it's an incredibly important way that we experience connection to God and one another. But for most Christians, Sunday morning worship, or even some of our interesting and innovative weekly worships like name blessings and things like that, aren't the fullness of their life, right? There's also outreach and spiritual growth and all of this stuff. And so we've been really committed to outreach. The pandemic made outreach complex. For us, outreach encompasses our service, our justice, and our evangelism commitments. That's evangelism with a small e, right? Which is, I always define it as not making anybody do anything, but making sure that everybody knows all the options on the table. Because I'm always meeting people who don't know that something like UVC is one of the options on the table. They don't know that an inclusive, Jesus-centered community is one of the options. And so we just want to make sure people know. And then if they say no, great, we're all still friends. So on the justice side, we had, after many years of different generations of UVC lay people and staff working super hard, the passage of the Empowering Communities for Public Safety Ordinance in the city of Chicago, which is one of the most broadly supported by faith and justice organizations ever, pieces of legislation guaranteeing civilian control of the police department. And we continue to work on that, as well as other justice initiatives. You'll see this week an opportunity to act on immigration and to pressure Senator Durbin to incorporate some broadening of immigration into the bills coming before the House and the Senate in upcoming weeks. And we continue to be a partner to Community Renewal Society, but are also seeking out, this is where we're sort of new in justice, local site-based partners for each site. And West in particular has made some great connections, and other sites are doing that as well. In terms of service, I think that was the part that we really, didn't know how that was going to work during the pandemic. We've historically had really great relationships with the Chicago Bridge Project, with El Rescate, with the Night Ministry, where we've done a lot of direct service in terms of food provision to people living on the street, and also different events and fun of people who are experiencing economic challenge. But two things that we kept being able to do were the night ministry. We can no longer serve, only night ministry staff can, but anyone can make lunch. So we are making lunches monthly to give to people without homes. And then the Proviso Township Food Pantry has been licensed to continue to operate throughout the pandemic with very strict things put in place, and our youth group has volunteered there. Our West folks have volunteered there. Folks from all 5 sites have volunteered there to make sure that food is provided to people who need it every single Saturday, which is really cool. And then in terms of evangelism, we did some very interesting kind of online ads and campaigns and different things to reach out to new communities, particularly through our Dragon Spirituality group. But it was really beautiful to have a summer where it felt like we could safely go into the world and outside. And so we were at the Puerto Rican Parade, we were at Boricua Fest, we were at Black Pride, we were at Wicker Park Fest, we were at Farmers Market, we were at Pride Southside. We had a family pride parade. And so we were really trying to get out into the community and help people know, like, this has been really hard and let's do it together. We invite you. And so I think those have been some really beautiful experiences for the church. And that whole outreach component, supporting that aspect of our life and ministry together as a community, was about $100,000.
Along with that, of course, what we're trying to do in the course of our outreach is to invite people into knowing God's inclusive love, and a lot of how that gets formed and experienced is in the context of community, right? And so many of us have found new ways to be in community with one another over the course of the pandemic, to have to figure out small groups online and remotely. And I apologize for the screaming baby in the background. But to figure out how to build connections. And that has been a real challenge for some folks, and for others, it's been a relief for whom it has, the folks who it's hard to get out of the house, either because they have family and complicated schedules, or because they're immunocompromised. And so and just with everything else that has happened over the course of this past year, there are some really real gifts to be gleaned from it, but also some challenges as well to overcome. So I think that some of the things that we wanted to highlight, you can certainly find listed out here. But I will say, we really tried to emphasize opportunities to gather outdoors, of course, and particularly for our kids. I know Hannah has worked so hard with the children's ministry coordinators to figure out creative ways to get the kids to be able to spend time together, even though they aren't vaccinated. And one of those took place, certainly apple picking, but also throughout the summer we tried Sunday gatherings downtown in Grant Park, where folks could maybe come. We've had a few different fires in people's backyards to enjoy s'mores and drinks and hanging out together. But and then some sort of old-fashioned, mailings to folks as well, as a way to kind of give something physical to go along with that digital presence, recognizing that that kind of tangible experience is so important. We have had we've been able to bring up our small groups to a place of richness and depth that now also isn't just exclusive to Chicago. We have folks, I'm leading a small group on Saturday mornings, and there is a couple from Phoenix who is joining us. God bless them, because they're starting at 7:30 a.m. their time. But it's been really, really wonderful. I led that same small group. It's for expecting parents or parents of very young babies. And I led that in January, just before I went on maternity leave. And we had a couple from Atlanta who had been part of our Wicker Park site several years ago and had relocated and wanted to be a part of that small group. So there are just some really interesting and exciting opportunities that are embedded in, even with the malaise, I think, that a lot of folks are feeling or have felt about not being able to gather in person and feeling that sense of disconnect from one another. So that is our our experience of community, or kind of over the past year, has been. I don't know if there's anything that sort of comes to mind as something that you would like to try to do in community, or that you did do over the course of the time that we have been together at UVC. We'd love to hear that and be able to lift that up as celebration too. So you can also just drop that into the chat.
Discipleship, for us, if some folks aren't familiar with the word discipleship, so if you've never heard that word before, that's how we describe spiritual growth. Basically, how do we grow spiritually in community? And we do that several ways, through some one-off things like movie nights or book clubs that help us understand new issues, but largely through small groups and intentional relationships, dedicated regular times committed to building spiritual friendship and growth with others, because we've just found that that is really transformational for a lot of people and really important to their life. And one of the nice things is that we were able to keep up a number of our small groups online. So we still had dozens and hundreds of people participated, as Emily said, mostly from Chicago, but not all. And a lot of alum really took that opportunity to come back. And we did everything from bibliodrama to new kinds of theology to kind of identity and cohort based things. I think they were all really fruitful experiences. We also tried a couple of new ways of doing devotional life and faith growth. So we had the Names of God devotional, where a different kind of quote and short meditation was sent to you each day on a different name of God during our Names of God sermon series. We did the Beautiful Bible Project that you can see, which is gorgeous online, where each person hand wrote or drew, basically did an illuminated manuscript of a chapter of a gospel. And then we put them together. And as a community, like UVC made a couple of books of the Bible. We are still working on it, but have our first regular youth group, and have continued to equip people in anti-racist discipleship through training with our partner CROAR, as well as other opportunities to learn, grow, and deepen their anti-oppressive commitments in multiple ways. And one of the interesting things about that has been the creation of spaces within UVC, in addition to our regular racial caucusing, like the AAPI Kickback, which is the Asian American Pacific Islander, Family Affair for Black UVCers, and Reclamando Latinidad for Latinidad UVCers, to really be able to have a space in which we experience diversity and difference, but then also kind of a home place where you can investigate your thing. And so discipleship has really been rich, I think, even as it's been challenging. And if anyone has been in a small group or done one of our discipleship events, some of the things we're hoping to do in the next year are a silent retreat, and then also some of our more traditional Saturday retreats. Our Advent retreat for families is coming up this Saturday, now that we can gather safely with some restrictions in place. We'd love to hear about it, what discipleship meant to you.
So this is the sexiest part of the presentation and sharing. But actually, you know, I always like to say that administration is the best kind of administration is the administration that you don't notice, because that means everything is going the well that it as well as it should. I think that for us at UVC, people probably have noticed things, and partly because there's been a lot of transition over the course of our time together, and we've been trying a lot of things administrative, kind of under that umbrella of administration, to help both be more effective in our use of time as a staff, but also in our data keeping and ways of doing life together that respect the boundaries of our reality. So for example, probably the biggest one would be, you've probably noticed that in worship, we have these QR codes that we're asking folks to use. We used to pass out weekly worship guides, and we, you know, for reasons partly practical in the sense of, you know, is it a good idea for us to be printing out, making copies every week, and throwing a lot of them away? Is that a really good use of, you know, steward of creation resources? But also, like, how can we be as touchless as possible for the sake of, you know, people's comfort levels? And so we developed these QR codes, which has really opened up some opportunities for us to make some resources available pretty immediately to folks around, you know, our worship guide is online, and that also has, you know, connections or links to like our Connect card, as well as opportunity, you know, how to give. And it's all in one kind of link tree is what it's called when you scan the code. I think that, you know, mainly it's just a matter of us trying to build new habits within worship to remember to scan that code and remember that our worship guide is online. And so there's some shifts that that we're trying to make just as a community to meet that change that I think can provide a lot of future opportunities for us. But I think it has been a learning curve on all sides around making sure that that all of that moves smoothly. Additional pieces, as you saw, caught a glimpse earlier of the newest member of my family, Micah Chite. He was born in February, and I was able to take a full maternity leave with the support of my colleagues and leaders in the congregation. And so just thank you to our community for making that possible, and just grateful to be able to not only be able to be a beneficiary of that, but to be the kind of workplace where women, pastors or otherwise, who are working full time, who need to take that time away, and I say parents, not just women, right? But parents can take the time that they need to invest and bond with and connect with their families, and we can do that in as generous of a way as we possibly can. We had a lot of different staff transitions as well. You probably noticed them. Our Wicker Park site saw the greatest number of them, with Deontay Johnson and John Michael Bagley coming on as worship co-leaders, and Pastor D'Angelo beginning as well last December. And so that was really big. But we also hired a worship leader for UVC West, and Shelby Jordan Lake, who was part of the launch team, is currently leading primarily on her own. And then starting in January, she's going to be stepping into a co-leader role with Kurt Schweitz, who will be joining her. He's a musician, and he's participating in a really cool theatrical production throughout this fall. And like a tidbit of information about, or a tidbit of trivia about Kurt, is that he was one of the OG worship leaders at our Hyde Park Woodlawn location, alongside Bernard Holcomb. And then he and his partner Leah and their family moved out west. And when he heard that UVC was going to be launching a site in River Forest, he reached out to me and said, "Hey, you know, are you guys going to be looking for a worship leader? I would love to be able to come back on leadership." And so to me, that's just another example of, like, you know, the ways that folks, you know, who leave us don't always leave us because, you know, they're leaving because of reasons that otherwise they would like to be able to continue to worship with us. And it left such an impression on him that, you know, as soon as he found out that we could, that we were going to be out in that way, he reached out, you know, several months before we were even, you know, starting a search. And the additional sort of two for celebration about that is that Kurt's partner Leah, it just recently came on as our very first children's ministry director, or director of children's ministry. And she is just a phenomenally thoughtful person who's passionate about the same kind of values that we proclaim at UVC all across the board. She is a PhD from the University of Chicago in theology. So she's way overqualified for her role, or maybe just qualified enough, right? Depending on the questions that are coming up that Sunday. But we celebrate that as well. Clara, that's right. So another new face at Wicker Park is that Clara Crocker joined very recently as our children's ministry coordinator there. And that is so new that it wasn't that the ink was already dry on, the digital ink was already dry on this one before we hired her. And then of course our online streaming has provided opportunities for new faces as well in leadership, new old faces. So James Chow is a longtime South Looper. And he's our media specialist, and so, you know, he's the guy behind the camera, making sure that things are going well in terms of angles and sound and all of that. Jennifer, our digipastor, and Melissa Kirk, who's our administration manager, and started last fall has really stepped up to the plate to be our producer in a lot of ways, running StreamYard and helping to switch from camera to camera. And so it has been a family affair in a lot of ways to try to get what we're going, get to where we're going, but also we have added a number of family members to that, and we celebrate that even as we hold the tension and grief of saying goodbye to familiar faces, and all of what transition entails for us as well. Probably last but not least, I would want to say that that we did get a brand new website that was launched this past spring, and so we are grateful for that, because more and more it is so abundant that our website is our digital front doorstep, and that it's essential to have a site that feels like it communicates a lot of who we are as well.
So those are the big places where we used our resources collectively as a community in the last year. A big part of tonight is to say thank you. Whether you volunteered to greet one Sunday, or gave your strategic insight, or gave $5 or $5,000, it took every single one of us this last year to make all of this happen. And so thank you. But we're also looking ahead to what might be coming. We've already discussed that a little bit of what might be coming, which is some things that we don't know. We're going to see how people respond as the pandemic in its shifts and valleys continues, and what our worshiping life looks like to include everyone, what it looks like to expand our online ministries that you're going to hear about in a minute from Jennifer. But I also want to talk about a couple of practical things. So as soon as Jennifer gives her report back about how online ministries are going, we're going to have a Q&A tonight. We do the general so that people can have a sense of where we are, but we also have a line-by-line budget available if any of you would like to look into the how much do we spend on printing? How much do we spend on pension? That's a report that we make every month and quarterly into a folder. So anyone has access to that at any time. If you want to see where we're spending our money, if you want to see where we're budgeting it, you can always do that. The people who make those decisions are the finance team, which is all lay leadership of the church, who come together to do that ministry. And so if you ever want to serve on the finance team, or if you have thoughts for them, please let them know. We will be putting together our line-by-line budget for the year 2022 after we get a little information back about where our final spending landed this year, since it was just a strange year, and how pledges are. And so as soon as that draft is drafted, you'll receive that as well in the e-news, and it'll be available on the website. So if you have any further questions about that, please let us know. But looking ahead, we have two things. So we planted West this year, our 5th site, and then we've had 2 explorers. Juan Pablo has been exploring the possibility of a new community called Enya, which would be focused on the Latinidad community in Chicago who are seeking an LGBTQ inclusive place to worship. And so he's about to give a report out in the next month or 2 that should really give you a sense of what he's hoping for and what the Holy Spirit has been doing in this time. And then it became clear to us actually pretty early on in the pandemic that we needed to make a permanent commitment to online worship, that it wasn't just a temporary thing, that for our folks who do shift work and have to work on Sundays sometimes, or who are chronically ill and can't always get out of bed and go to an in-person place for worship, or for people who are in another city or place where they don't have access to an inclusive community, it was just a really important, accessible form of worship and community. And so we've invested in that. And so Jennifer Stevens was hired a month or 2 ago to begin really envisioning, for the next 9 to 12 months. And we took money that we weren't expecting to spend, right? We came out of reserves and said, we want to invest in this. This is really important. What might this look like? And so we asked Jennifer to just give you a couple minutes of what that has been looking like and what she's learned so far.
Yeah, so it's been actually really exciting. One of the main goals for the online community is that it's an actual community. So they feel as if they are a part of the community, that it's not just watching somebody else worship, that we are interactive. That is my goal, my position actually. So if you've ever watched the online worship service, that it's not just us streaming the different sites, but also I'm interacting with the individuals that are watching online, and we have conversation and we build community through that. And so we are streaming each week. We have tried a few things, right? We stream from each individual site, and we've been rotating that through the sermon series or the month. And that is so that all that UVC has to offer, all the diversity of voice and diversity of worship, is also available to those that are worshiping online. And then just last week, we experimented, and we'll continue to do this as experiment. I find great joy in that. But just last week, we invited the online community, those that worship online specifically, to be a part of the worship service. So we had individuals who read scripture, they gave their testimony, they did our mission and values, and also we invited people to do worship, that actually lead worship in our community. And so we'll do that again December 26th. So we're very excited about that. And one of the things I think that I've really learned about doing this community is people really desire to have a space that they feel seen and known and loved, and that they can't always find that maybe in the community that they live, right? So of course, online community is for those that feel uncomfortable about coming into service. But what I've noticed the most is that we're reaching so much further out to individuals that don't have this opportunity, as Hannah has said earlier, that they don't have these inclusive communities, and this is a space for them to experience that. And then, so the hope for us is to continue to do this online, and the vision that I would like and UVC has is that all that we offer for UVCers that are in person, that live in the Chicago area, like mission and justice and the small groups and all the service, is that we also are able to offer those in the different communities in which individuals are joining us from. So that is something as we're working toward, to see that, are we able to also do these small villages, as we would call them, as individuals continue to worship together, but maybe in the same geographical area, and then they could do service and justice in that area as well.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. And thanks, Adrian and Mike, for being here. It's now time for whatever you want it to be. Are there things you have questions about, things you have concerns about, things you want to comment on? Where are you at, and what would you like to know?
Just overall, how are we doing? Are we solvent?
Yeah, we are in
comparison.
it's a little strange because we're in very good financial shape, mainly because we didn't pay rent last year. And so that is really good, because we're anticipating that it'll be a slow build back, both financially as well as obviously like in membership. So we're kind of wondering, like, okay, well, let's see what comes in with stewardship and pledges over the next couple of months, in terms of what people feel like they can and are being led to commit financially. But it's also been strange, because I think Christian had said at our staff meeting that this past year we've had twice as much unpledged giving as previous years. Is that right, Hannah?
Wow.
I think that was what he had said. So normally, at any rate, UVC tends to have a pretty high unpledged giving rate, because a lot of new people come through our doors and like decide that they're going to start giving in July, right? And so we hadn't anticipated that. So we generally kind of have a higher assumption around that, or budget around that. But even this past year, it was twice as much. We had fewer actual pledges, but twice as much. And so some of that too could be reflective of people feeling a little hesitant to make a financial commitment at the beginning of the year, not sure of what their like employment situation might look like later on down the line. And then finding over the course of the year, like, oh, well, I can keep giving at the rate that I was. And so it wasn't recorded necessarily as a pledge, but as unpledged giving too. But all that to say is that finances are not following the same pattern that they had before, but we're in pretty good shape because of the money that we've saved. We also had applied for a PPP loan, anticipating that there would be a sudden drop in giving, and so that will probably that will also serve us over the course of this year, I'm sure, as well. So we definitely want to be good stewards of the decisions that we make around how we spend our finances. But because we have this margin, it has given us the ability to be able to invest in things like our online ministry, which currently is like a zero, we're not getting income from that, right? But it is purely an investment, a faithful investment, seeing that, like, sensing that the Spirit is leading us towards something. And our goal, of course, is not really to make money as much as just be able to fund ourselves, right? Yeah, exactly.
I think those are the two things it's probably important for folks to know if you're not into the line by line thing, is like, one is it's a reality that the amount we are spending right now that we are back in person on rent, ministries, and staff is more than the amount people pledged. And so if we didn't have reserves, and if we had to do that for multiple years, that wouldn't be sustainable. And our finance team, in their wisdom in 2020, looking at how weird and unpredictable things were when we didn't have to pay rent for several months in a row, put that into a reserve fund of well over $300,000, precisely so that, like, when the rainy day came, which we knew that it would, and like, here it is, we wouldn't have to make difficult decisions at a time that was too premature. So I'm really grateful to them for that wisdom. I think we have room to move.
That sounds like the definition of gospel, like good news, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's very like, this is like Joseph and 7 fat cows, 7 skinny cows. I think there was a little bit of like, okay, we know that this is happening now. We also know that this will be happening then. Let's have some storehouses.
Any other questions that are coming up for folks?
Yeah, I had a question about the kind of the staffing and personnel. There was the one slide that had the administration team. Is that the only compensated staff? Like, how does UVC kind of make those staffing decisions between, the paid positions and who's serving on a voluntary basis?
So the lay team that oversees staffing is called the Staff Parish Relations Committee. And so we have a picture of them all on our website, although they're not in the narrative budget. We have, oh my God, I have to count in my head. 5 full-time staff members. Is that correct, Emily? You, me, John, D'Angelo, Christian. Oh, Christian's part-time. He's only full-time because of West. So we have 4 full-time staff members. And then Christian, Jennifer, and Juan Pablo are part-time ministry staff. Blake and Melissa are part-time administrative and communications staff. And then each site has a part-time worship leader and a part-time children's leader. Some sites choose to split that between 2 people depending on how they feel and do. So all of those are compensated and paid people. And then we also have a business manager who's a part-time compensated person. And we look at that pay fairly regularly, and SPRC looks at that pay to make sure that it is both sustainable and matches peer institutions as much as possible. We just raised our weekly childcare worker pay rate to $20 an hour rather than $15 an hour, right, in order to try and keep childcare workers on. So those decisions are all made at the level of the SPRC, if that's helpful.
Yeah, and just so you know, SPRC stands for Staff Parish Relations Committee, and it's made up of folks at least one person from each site who can sort of just speak through the lens of their particular location. And same for finance as well. So that's, I think, a valuable piece to kind of keep in mind. So I'm gonna, let me see if I can find, oh yeah, our leadership teams are listed on our website, but there's not a picture of them, but you can find them alongside, like with a listing of what site they're associated with as well.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, so as Hannah mentioned, we are going to be making our the proposed budget for 2022 available as soon as it is set. Our finance team kind of feels good about releasing that as a proposal anyway. It won't be, though, just to sort of correct something, it won't be on our website, but we will make it available like in our e-newses. And if you're like, I really would like to see it, then you can email any of Hannah or myself, and we'll make sure that you all can get it as well. And that's mainly because we don't want to put a draft on the website of a line by line budget when we really kind of don't know where things are going to be landing. Once that budget is finalized, which happens in reflection or it sort of in response in terms of what we think, okay, these are the pledges, that this is the amount of money that we're probably going to have to work with for 2022. Then the finance team will go back to the budget and say, you know, what do we want to stretch on, and sort of say, like, you know, it's worth it to overspend here. And what are the things that we have to say, well, this is just going to have to be for another year, or we're going to have to figure out how to do this in a different way. So all of that is going to be that'll probably happen specifically in January, and we'll make sure that, you know, we communicate that to let people know, like, when the budget has been finalized as well. But we really want to be, oh, go ahead, Hannah.
I was just gonna say one other date to put on everybody's calendar, so those are some dates to keep in mind, right? The draft budget will come out in a week or two, and then the finalized budget usually happens in the 3rd or 4th week of January, when we know all the pledges, basically, which is like how we plan for the future. And so if you have feedback on the budget, that's a time to give it. But then there's also a very important meeting the 1st week of December, is it the 5th, Emily, called Charge Conference, which is our formal once a year church meeting where we affirm new candidates for ministry. What?
The 6th.
The 6th,
Yeah.
December 6th, where we affirm new candidates for ministry, where we vote in our lay leadership slate. So this has not happened in the history of our church, but if you had a real concern about one of the lay leaders, or if you wanted to say, I want that position, that, you know, that could happen at that meeting. Usually it's a more sort of consensus-based Quakery, like we've had those conversations with one another beforehand thing. And so we vote on our lay leadership, but we also vote on a draft budget at that meeting, and then usually re-vote at a special charge conference in January. So if you're interested in kind of the inner workings of the church in taking a leadership role in that decision making, that's a great place to start, is that meeting in December.
You know, the one thing that stands out to me is that we have a wide spectrum of activities and auxiliaries, and the whole creativity end of it is, I think, is impressive. Of course, I'm subjective, but wow, that's a wide range of creativity going on there.
I mean, I think that speaks to our posture and our culture at UVC, where we really try to lean into, like, what might the Spirit be inviting us to do, right? And what are the gifts that folks are bringing to the table? And sort of saying, let's give it a try. Like, we don't have, there are very few things where we feel completely, like, probably the only thing I would say, yeah, exactly. The only thing I would say that, like, speaking of money, I would say the only thing that I feel like we're really just like committed to, and really it would take something significant to move us on, is the fact that we share our funds. So, you know, our sites don't, you know, if one site gives more than another, that doesn't mean they get more. Like, we have a common purse, and we're committed to sharing that. Even when congregants at different times have said, no, I just want to give to Andersonville, or I just want to give to Hyde Park Woodlawn, we say, we totally understand that. And you can mark that you are from that site. So it will be sort of like recorded as coming from that site, but it all goes to the same pot, because, if every site is doing its
Right.
own thing, then, how are we going to fund digital ministries?
Gotcha.
How are we going to be able to ensure that those sites that are located in less resourced parts of the city are going to get the same kind of care, attention, and resourcing as those sites that exist in maybe parts of the city that have more financial resources? So that's probably the main thing I would say we just are staunchly committed to, and it would take a lot for us to change our minds about that. But almost everything else, it's sort of like, let's give it a try, and there's a real low sense of anxiety around like risk taking and failure. And so I celebrate that just personally, because I think that, churches are a place where there's a lot of anxiety, I think, where people are kind of married to the thing that they feel really close to, but also have a lot of fears about, not getting it right. And then, and then feeling some kind of embarrassment or shame about having failed. But our culture and our leadership, our staff, have all embraced this way of approaching ministry as a living at life together, right? As a living, breathing organism that changes and shifts. And so we especially covet your prayers over these next few months as we discern, like, what is the Spirit revealing to us about worship on Sunday mornings at our different sites, and the different challenges and opportunities that are showing up at our different sites. And we're really trying to incline our ear and keep it close to the ground, so that way we can really get a sense of what would God have us do to fulfill God's intentions and vision for UVC in ways that are meaningful and substantive for our folks in Edgewater, and in Wicker Park, and in South Loop, and in the western suburbs, and in Hyde Park Woodlawn, and among our Latinidad folks as well. And that is, it's a lot of moving parts, but it's all really hopeful and exciting, even as it is like stressful and anxiety-inducing at different times too. So please pray for our church, right? And the decision makers in our church, which are certainly the pastoral staff and other paid staff, but also those leadership teams that Hannah mentioned, our SPRC and our vision team and our finance team and anti-racism team.
Yeah. And the purpose of this is to be informational, to be as transparent as we can. And if there's anything that continues to be unclear or of concern, like this is my job, and it took me so long to understand church budgets. So like, there is literally no number of times you can ask a question that's too many times. We invite you all, but we'd also be remiss if we didn't say that we do this all together. And so if you are so inspired to contribute to the mission of Urban Village Church, we encourage you to make a pledge. And so I'm someone who converted to Christianity at the age of 16. I had no idea what a pledge was until I was like 24. I'm about to post it in the chat. But a pledge is basically you telling the church what you think you will give over the course of the year 2022. It's a promise. It's not a check. So it's not the money itself. It's a commitment that says, here's where I'm committed financially to the church over the year 2022. And the reason that we do that, because I think it can sometimes be confusing to people, why am I like making a promise and then giving later? And why can't I just set up an auto pay and blah, 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 is so that we can plan. Pledges are so that we can plan together, because there is no great national church fund for cool stuff, right? Like, we do what we can do together. And so I'm never worried about the Spirit moving. I'm never worried about what Jesus Christ is doing here. Urban Village is always going to be, and it's always going to be awesome. But what that looks like financially and structurally does depend on the total amount of resources we have to work with. And so when you pledge, we can add up all the pledges and we can plan appropriately. And that's what it's for, in case anyone watching this recording has never done that before. So we put the link here. It's urbanvillagechurch.breezechms.com/form/2022 pledge form, or much more easily, you can go to our website and it's on the gift.
urbanvillagechurch.org/gift.
Yes, urbanvillagechurch.org/give. Any final questions, things burning on your heart, things people need? Let us go into the world in peace and good courage. And I'm going to turn the recording off. And then if people want to hang out after and have any additional questions, please, hang out and do what you need to do. Blessings, everybody.